there, this is Sherry Hayes with MomDelights.com, and we've been discussing about Charlotte Mason for real moms. For those of us who don't have a lot of time to really get into the purism of Charlotte Mason, but still want to take advantage of some of the wonderful things that Charlotte Mason advocated. Okay, one of them, being that children could learn from living books, and we'll get into more of that later. I was talking about my journey. My journey with homeschooling started in about 1989, and I got hooked into the idea that the only way I could do things with my children would be to use workbooks. They made me feel comfortable that I was touching on the subjects I needed to touch on, that I was helping them to learn all the basics. I didn't know how to teach reading or math or anything. I needed some help, and I think a lot of us moms feel that way when we first start out, especially, and even sometimes when we, later on. Okay, so what I did was I got on the internet to find support, and I think a lot of moms do that today especially, but back then it was dial-up, and I just got little glimpses of something called the Charlotte Mason method. And it was, I saw primarily articles written by a lady named Karen Andriola, very sweet lady. And I also read a book, For the Children's Sake is the name of the book, and she talked a lot about Charlotte Mason in a very conversational way, and it just really opened my eyes to the opportunities of beauty, how I could bring beauty and enjoyment into our homeschooling and appreciate each child for the way God created them and for their interests and for their abilities, and I could incorporate all of that in a homeschooling scheme that it was less vinegary and more sweet. There are times when we have to take some hard medicine in life, and homeschooling is no exception. There are times when, there's medicine-y parts that you just have to suck it up and deal with it. But for the most part, education and learning should be an activity that should be enthusiastically appreciated by both the teacher and the student. And where that happens, it's like a little taste of heaven on earth. And Charlotte Mason is a way that you can enjoy that to a greater extent. Now, of course, it isn't always perfect, all right? But these ideas can help you get closer to that goal. One thing I wanted to talk about is there are some misconceptions that we have about education in general, and I think I just touched on one of the first one is that we think that here's not the first one, but we think that in order to be a good homeschool teacher, we have to teach our children everything. Or we have to follow the scope and sequence of the school directly, like in every facet, in every aspect. And that we have to concentrate on every area to make sure we've touched on it, okay? That we have to cover every subject individually. Like in schools, you have time for reading, and then time for history, and time for science, and then time for math, and then time for, you see what I'm saying? So we split everything up into these little compartments and categories, and that has actually been done on purpose, according to John Taylor Gatto, that the way you deal with people and make them more compliant is that you take all of information and you give it only in fractions of information to them, and you make it disjointed so they don't connect the dots, so therefore they're pretty much always clueless and dependent on expert advice. Instead of being able to come to their own conclusions and being able to rule their own lives, they have to have an expert to help them. And that's a way socially you can socially engineer a culture and a country by making them dependent on you because they can't think for themselves. And so actually splitting everything up all day long actually it kind of ruins the love of learning as well, because you're not able to make those connections. You're taught that making those connections is against the rules. And so here's another misconception, that you have to sit your children down to a desk to learn for the same amount of hours as children sit in classrooms in schools all day long. And actually, those kids aren't sitting in chairs for 6 hours a day receiving instruction either. There's a lot of logistical stuff that goes on. You know, you're sitting there and they're taking attendance, they're talking about the school rules, they're having assemblies, they're standing in line to go to the potty, standing in line to get a drink of water, standing in line for lunch, standing in line after the school bus. You know, they have to stand in line for the school bus, and then they drive, and then they have to get off the school bus, and they have to stand in line to get in the classroom. Then the bell rings, and there's 10 minutes you have to scurry around to get your classes in junior high and high school. And there are all sorts of things that happen in school that have nothing to do with learning, and you know it's true, and so do I, because we remember. So to say that those people are sitting in those classrooms for 6 hours learning every day is baloney, because they're not. In fact, if you took and you compressed all of the actual learning that goes on each day in those classrooms, you would be hard to find 3 or 4 hours that are actually spent in true education. Okay, I remember, we had 50 minutes in a class period. So we'd get in there, it'd take 10 minutes for everybody to sit down, the teacher get everybody, the roll was called, everybody got situated, and then you have maybe 30 or 35 minutes towards the end of the class, everybody's getting antsy. So, you know, if you had 6 classes a day, you might end up with 3.5 maybe hours of actual education. So, when you're sitting with your kids at home, and also a lot of the learning that your kids enjoy at home is not necessarily sitting down with a textbook. It might be when you're driving in the car and they see a dog walking, and you're talking about caring for dogs. You talk about expenses of having a dog, because they say, "Mom, can we have a dog?" So you've got to go through and talk about all the different realities of life. Well, guess what? You're educating your children at that point too. Let's say you're washing dishes and you say, "You know what? You left some food on that dish. Do you know what happens? You know about foodborne illness?" And then you illustrate and you talk to them about that. Guess what? That's education. Okay, you have more opportunities to do that with your children because they're with you all day. You have more opportunities to teach them on the way, like the Bible says in Deuteronomy, teach them in the way. Okay, so you're teaching them about the Lord. You're talking to them, you know, different situations in life, different current events. Maybe you're dealing with a relative that has a terminal disease, and you're talking about the issues of life. You're sharing the Lord with them. You're looking at creation and talking about how God is the creator. That is education. That goes into the whole schema. And so when you look at that, actually when you have your children at home, you have more than 6 hours a day that you're educating them, but not necessarily sitting down with a textbook or a workbook. Okay? Because guess what? Everything counts. So there's another misconception that I hope we can do away with. And I kind of talked to this at the beginning, but sometimes we have the impression that if we're not unhappy doing school, then we're not doing it right. If our kids aren't unhappy doing school, then they're probably not learning anything. And that's really the opposite of how it should be. Although we know from our own school experience that all the things that we thought were horrible, awful, and nasty are all the things that were on the tests. Those are the things we were tested on, right? Not the fun things, like when you're learning about Egypt and you find out about how they mummified people and you go, "Oh, that is so amazing, so cool," you know, but that was not on the test, you know. So the things that you learn, but you know what? Learning about that makes the other parts of Egypt stick in your mind. The things that enthuse you are the things that you remember. They make the other parts that are kind of icky memorable for you. So there are some misconceptions, and here's another thing that I want you to know. That no school program, no matter how exhaustive, will ever teach a child everything they need to know. It won't be possible. That segregating ideas into little packets called subjects so that they do not touch each other is the devil's way of keeping people stupid. That any child worth his salt should never, ever be contented with sitting for 6 hours in books. Okay? And if we are doing it right, learning should be delightful for both student and teacher. So I'll leave you with those ideas, and we'll come back next time and we'll begin to delve into the basics of Charlotte Mason and how they can be a positive, wonderful thing for you in your homeschooling. Bye-bye.